Our next speaker today is Pawel Miechowski from Poland, who is currently Partnerships Manager at 11-Bit Studios. Previously a writer and a PR marketing ninja for all 11-bit titles. Before that, a writer and a PR guy at Metropolis Software, including a period of 2007 and 2009 at CD Projekt. Pawel started his career in game dev in mid-90s, working on animations for The Prince and the Coward, point-and-click adventure game. So let's welcome Pawel. Come on, round of applause. And as usual, there's some technical things going on. How are you enjoying yourselves so far? Come on. Is that all? Bring some noise, people! That was weak. Come on, you can do better. I know you can do better. Hey, Pawel, are you ready? Almost? Come on, one more time. 3, 2, 1. Woo! Hey! That's the energy, that's the spirit.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my presentation, Create a Marketing Strategy for Your Game. And I'm going to tell you some do's and don'ts about working with publisher or simply not working with a publisher. We already had a presentation from Aga about PR, and she covered some points that actually I wanted to do, so I will adjust to that and add some points to her as well as Brian's talk about self-publishing. First of all, quick introduction. I'm from 11-Bit, used to work at CD Projekt and Metropolis Software. I'm working in game dev since 21 years. I work on more than 20 games. The last game I was working on as a writer was This War of Mine. I stopped writing anymore, as I kind of enjoy being the PR guy who goes on conferences and drinks vodka. I'm pretty good at it. And 11-Bit, I hope you heard about us, is a developer and a publisher at the same time, which is quite unusual, I think, in the industry. For example, we released the game Beat Cop last year, which sold around 160k copies, and I think it's a pretty good score for an indie game. We've made as a developer a series of Anomaly games and a few small mobile games, and This War of Mine, which was a notable hit. And now working on a new game called Frostpunk, which is actually to be released in 2 weeks, on the April 24. Now let's begin with my talk. So, marketing strategy, at least from my experience, begins with vision. That's something I believe to be really important. And what's vision? That's not only a thing, the idea for your game, but I also think it's quite important to have a vision of a company. That was touched by Brian in his presentation as well. His vision is to make Steam World games. Our vision, for example, at 11-Bit is to create thought-provoking titles targeted toward mature audience, and This War of Mine is such, and I believe Frostpunk will be as well. So let's say, for example, your vision is we create the best farming simulators in the universe. The vision allows you to have long-term goals, to position yourself in, say, 5 years from now. If you want to know, if you know where you're going to be in 5 years, it makes goals to achieve easier because you know your way. Of course, there will be failures on the way and some problems, but still, you already know where to go. So I strongly advise to create a clear vision of the company, then a vision of a game. And when we have a vision of a game, and let me use the example of This War of Mine, we create a thing called brand book. And brand book is something that relates to design and to marketing as well, because I strongly believe that marketing begins with a game. That's a quite often mistake done by indies that they think of a game in terms of a genre, unless a genre is your idea. But what I mean is, for example, that the vision says, okay, I'm gonna make an RPG with 40 levels. That's not a vision. The vision is, I'm gonna make a game about dragons fighting trolls. That already says something. And then you build a game around this vision rather than genre-oriented creation. Of course, the vision may be around, maybe built around a genre. And to give an example, there's a game Super Hot from Poland that was quite a big success. And the vision in that game is a shooter in which time moves only when you move. It's a quite sexy feature, and it was a big success, but it can show you that actually you can create a vision based on the genre. But other than that, I believe it's better to have a vision not related to any specific genre. And for example, with This War of Mine, the vision was to create a game about civilians living in war. And we built survival game around this idea, because if you have a civilian trying to survive war, obviously it's about surviving. So we made a survival game with a ton of different mechanics as well. But we rather build games around the vision, around the idea, not about a specific genre. And now we create something at the beginning called brand book. It's a knowledge we actually took from other industries, because head of marketing at 11-bit, Patrick Brzeszczuk, used to be a guy who was responsible for promotional campaigns of big brands like Ferrari, really big brands, global brands. And he's also a gamer, so we stole him from the other industry. Now he's a head of marketing for 3 years by now, or 2. And Patrick brought this very important knowledge of creating a brand book. What's a brand book? Brand book is a 1-pager, maybe 2-pager document, but it's not a fact sheet that you export outside. It's something you use internally as your sort of a Bible. In a brand book, we specify what is the product. So in our case, it's a game about surviving war. Positioning, that means where your game is targeted towards whom. Synopsis, of course, briefly say about it. Core gameplay underlines gameplay feature. Competition, it's the area where other games may be for the same target as you target your game for. Key features, that of course speaks for itself, as well as target group. Then we specified what media are key for a game. In This War of Mine, interestingly, gaming media, of course, were important, but we knew that the topic itself may be sexy for mainstream media who do not cover games on a regular basis, but an anti-war game could be a sexy topic for them, because in mainstream, as you may know, games are considered something like making fun of war, because of all of those Call of Duties, Battlefields, and such. So creating an anti-war game would have a potential to be picked by mainstream media, and it actually happened. We had a game covered by BBC, New Yorker, Washington Post, Die Welt, and many major mainstream media in the world. And for us, that was a super good news, because it became a media darling, so-called. So any news we would release that was widely covered by media. So anyway, you should specify your media. Not all media are for every game. So IGN, for example, tries to, that was brought by Agnieszka, tries to cover everything, but they sort of became lately more celebrities than classic media. Of course, PC Gamer is for games created for PC, and rather premium. They do not cover too much free-to-play stuff. Kotaku likes games about really unusual topics, weird stuff. So you should specify what media is the key for you, and simply contact those at some point with your game. USP, unique selling point. This is something that we simply try to sell a game in one sentence. And with this war of mine, that was a sentence we further used in the campaign, and it was, in war, not everyone is a soldier. It also tells you that, yeah, it's gonna be a war game, but not about soldiers. Sounds kind of sexy, so this is your USP. Impact is that we try to define what feelings the player would feel after leaving the game. So think about, when creating brand book, what do you want to achieve in your gamer? So let's say it's a game about slashing dragons. So what players should feel after that? That would be satisfaction because of killing huge monsters. So this is how you specify the impact your game has on the target gamer, and that also allows you later to easier project specific features in the game, because you know what feelings you want to achieve. And that was actually told by Agnieszka, that remember that in games mostly we are selling emotions: satisfaction, relief, laughter, fear, feeling of remorse, which is a strong emotion, and it's kind of hard to manipulate with it, but it's doable. Then communication areas and channels. By that I mean what kind of communication areas you cover, but not physically, but for example, in a case of this war of mine, that would be talking about civilian life, different conflicts in the world, about emotional toll of surviving war and such. And then channels, this is where you decide through which channels you want to talk, be it Facebook, be it YouTube, be it media, be it press releases, and so on. Tonality, this is also something I find quite important. So for example, if you have a super serious game, you shouldn't be making jokes in your communication at all. Because if your game is serious, the entire communication should be serious as well. So for example, if we wanted to talk about surviving war in this war of mine, we set the tonality that it should be serious, without military lingo, without using specific game development words, and to make it as much as possible close to reality. So for example, we didn't use word character, we used word civilian. We didn't use word inventory, we just used word our thing and such, and that has a reflection in the game itself. So tonality describes how you should communicate about your game. If your game is some funny joke like getting over it with Bennett Foddy, obviously you shouldn't be using serious tonality, but very light one with as much jokes as possible. And then if there's something extra to add to the brand book, you should do it. And like I said, this is going to be your Bible. If you have set the brand book, you shouldn't be rather changing it or communicate about the game in other way than set in your brand book. You should just stick to it and be very consecutive about it, because that way it allows you to build bigger credibility. And as I said, it doesn't touch only your marketing, it touches the game as well, because at some point we've made a mistake in this war of mine and a few other titles as well, that it was too far away from our brand book. And then we realized during focus tests that it was not working. So we had to change some things. Like for example, the change from inventory within a game to our things. And that has an influence on your design, like I said. And you should be having this brand book, if you're going to use this strategy, of course, at the very beginning, not before the announcement, because then it's definitely too late. Now, Agnieszka also said that, but I'm going to underline again, it's a common mistake I see done by indies, that they announce a game very early. I think it's a major mistake because then there's no information to fill the gaps between the announcement and the release. So I completely agree with her that ideally the campaign for an indie game should last 6 months down to 3 months, because you would be able to create some milestone communication hits like unveil trailer, release date announcement trailer, some previews and such. Now some indies really announce a game like 2 years before the release and then they don't have anything to talk about it. And sometimes they think they can communicate again. And come on, it's really hard to announce a game twice. Like once you've done that, then the media will not be interested in your another announcement because you just did that like a year ago. You may have noticed there's a Riga in the background that I stole from Wikipedia, and to make it more interesting, here's another Riga picture. Yeah. Now, it's important to think about your marketing strategy in a holistic way. I mean that from business perspective. So, it's not just a game and then the bucket with marketing stuff and then the bucket with dollars in it. No, it should be perceived as one. So the organization, how people are structured, how their work is structured, it's a part of the thing that how the game is created. Financing it is a part of it as well. The marketing is tightly connected to the game itself because this is how you communicate about your work. So I strongly advise to think about everything as one rather than separated divisions of financing, organization, and so on. This is why I call it holistic approach. Now, I hate it, but you should be thinking about your game as a product. And by the product, I mean like, you know, candy bar or car or something. Because if you think about your game as a product, although I strongly believe that game developers are artists, same artists like movie makers or musicians, but still you should be thinking about your game as a product. So think about for whom you are making it. What is your niche? What is your target gamer? Because there is no game for everyone. If you try to make a game for everyone, it's going to be a game for no one. Then how your product is communicated about and how you distribute it. Be it Steam, be it Switch, like Brian said, be it Humble Store, and whatever channels you can come up with. And then, once you've set the brand book and the vision and you start the development, or even at the later stage, it's less important in that case, you should be thinking about this. Publisher or self-publishing. Like, we had this talk from Iman's earlier on today, and I got an impression that he made the right choice with working with publisher. However, guys like Brian definitely prefer self-publishing, and it's totally understandable because they don't need to share revenues, they are completely independent in what they do, they can control the entire process of creating, communicating, and such. And 11-bit, actually, you know, we are big company by now, around 100 people, but we're completely independent in what we do, and no one tells us what we are supposed to be doing, which is good. So there are surely pluses of self-publishing. However, oh yeah, you know where it comes from, right? Self-publishing completely makes sense only if you have capabilities and skills of a publisher. Now, I have noticed in Brian's talk that they have 22 people at the team, 3 people dedicated to marketing. So let's say roughly that's 10% of the team. At 11-bit we have 100 people, and PR/marketing team is 8 guys. So a bit less than 10%. But now think about your game that you are competing with teams like Image and Form or 11-bit who has a dedicated marketing team. So if you don't have it, there where the publisher becomes handy because most of them really have experienced guys in that. If I would combine all the years that my team was working on marketing of games, that would be probably 100 years of experience, because I was working on it for 10 years, the other guy 10 years and such. So you would be competing with people with a hell of an experience, or working with them if they are your publisher. So yes, self-publishing makes sense, like in the case of SteamWorld Games, but they have their own marketing team, which is super important nowadays, because Indiepocalypse is a thing. So I checked the report by Steam Spy lately. So last year there was 7,696 new games on Steam. Like, that's hell of a lot. I remember when we released Anomaly Wars on Earth, which was an inverted tower defense game in 2011, there were like 2 new games each week. So that means that every new game was rolling on the Steam carousel for a week, giving you proper discoverability on the store. Now you have, let me do the quick math, around 21 games a day. So that means you are competing with 20 titles a day. That's horrible. That's a lot, and most of those titles are going to, that's sad, but they are going to fail, because there's another statistics taken from Steam Spy, that the median owners for an indie game last year was just 1.5 thousand. So if you have a game for 10 euros, which is the average price for an indie game, that means just, 15K minus taxes, minus Steam's provision, minus the copies sold in Russia and China, which have prices, you need to know, lower than other countries. And you specifically set different prices for those countries, because full price selling in those countries don't work at all. Although I heavily recommend translating to Russian and Chinese, because those markets are huge. You may not know that, but Poland became a big market for indie games as well. According to Steam Spy, that's number 7 market in the world, so translating to Polish absolutely makes sense. We sold roughly 3% of our games in Poland. Maybe not a big number, but if you sell 100K copies, that's 3,000 copies, so that would surely cover your translation costs. So, but if Indiepocalypse is a thing now, it really makes sense to have a publisher, because publisher have, at least a proper publisher, should have people who know how to sell a game, who know how to communicate, who know how to make bigger numbers. And I hope BitCop could be such an example, because like I said, we sold 160K copies. There was another game called Spacecom, really small strategy game, but very neat. We published that 4 years ago, I think. We also sold 100K copies, which was a huge success for the game, because it was a small project, and I think the development costs were like 20,000 bucks or something. So the so-called the black, which means the income was quite big. And so-called the red means you're below the line and you did not cover the costs. Now, another thing is why it makes sense to work with publishers. For example, Brian's team can be already considered veterans, because they made a ton of games, they have a big experience and so on. But even such guys have problems. Now, 2 examples. Golem Gates is a game created by former Epic Games employees and guys who have made some really popular big AAA titles. And that game was released like 3 weeks ago, I think. And it sold 1.5 thousand copies. Now, look at the game. We're talking about really solid production value, and a game done by really experienced people, and it horribly failed, because they thought that the game itself is enough, And really, even such guys without such experience ignored marketing, and they self-published and failed horribly. Now another example, that's the last game from Cliff Bleszinski, the guy who created Gears of War and some others really popular, strong brands. And that game sold 80,000 copies, I think, on Steam, and I'm pretty sure that did not cover the cost because it's a big game created by quite a big team. So the development costs were probably 3, 4, maybe 5 million bucks. 80k copies is not enough. Although Cliffy is telling that in an interview that the game is performing much better on Sony PlayStation, I strongly doubt it because we have released many games on many consoles. Usually PC still is the biggest market for such games, although Switch tends to be, like Brian said, a big new thing. To give you some examples, we sold 2.5 million copies of This War of Mine on Steam. On consoles, that was, I think, around 1 million. Well, still can't complain, a big hit, yeah, but Steam was bigger. Anyway, Lawbreakers, made by a really experienced guy, is a fail. They ignored marketing. Now, another thing you should be considering when working with publisher or not and creating your marketing strategy, it's the success. Bias or bias?
Bias.
Bias. So, I'm pretty sure you heard about it. There's a really good talk about Rami Ismail about it, and it means that indies are looking up to success stories. And you know, the best lesson, unfortunately, is a failure. So, as painful as it is, you can learn many things from failing. And people should be looking on failure stories to learn from them, what mistakes have been done and so on. But indie creators tend to look only on success stories because obviously they want to make a success. But this is not a good lesson, simply. You know, there's no golden rule for success. Sometimes you can create a really good game and still fail. So failure is a way better lesson, unfortunately. And then there's a survivor bias. So I don't know if you met that term, but to give you an example, this theory was created by a Jewish-German mathematician, I think before the Second World War. And this theory has been, for example, used in fixing the planes that were fighting in the battles of Second World War. So the guys who were working in factories, plane factories, they were thinking that if a plane got back from a battle and had few shots in the, I don't know, let's say in the wings, that those things should be strengthened to make a plane more safe machine, simply to speak. Well, actually, this mathematician said that no, it's a wrong thinking, because if the plane got back, it's probably the other parts you should strengthen, because those planes did not get back. So same thinking should be applied to planning your strategy. You look only, when creating data, researching and so on, you look only at the companies that survived. So probably you should be also looking at companies that went bankrupt and failed to know where the weak points were. So this is the survivor bias. And then the photo of Riga again, quite nice. Yeah. So working with a publisher. Now, I used to work with really all the big ones, I think, before the Steam era, when retail was the only thing. Atari, Electronic Arts, Eidos, Monolith, I think all of them. And most of them sucked completely because they were only interested in building up a portfolio. If you make a AAA, yeah, they are going to love you. If you make a smaller game, and back then it was called low price, mid price, AAA, and we were making mid price games. If there was no love, they would ignore your game completely. And now, at 11-bit, we are not only a developer, but we are also a publisher. We've been in the trenches. So I strongly believe there has to be mutual love and understanding. So pick a publisher who really believes in your vision. If you feel there's no love, unless you are really forced to do so, rather don't work with such a publisher. But what publisher has that you may not have? Like I said, marketing knowledge, that's one. The other thing are contacts. I'm working in this industry for 20 years, and guys, I know people from Sony, I know people from Microsoft, I don't know people from Nintendo yet. I know media from all around the world, including even Chinese media, because I've managed to build a network of good contacts in China over the last years. What publisher can else do? Exhibiting shows. So most of the good ones, like for example Devolver, they are our competition, but I am supposed to be honest, so I can recommend Devolver because they are a pretty good publisher. So they are, they are at PAX West, they are at PAX East, they are at Gamescom, Brazil Game Show, E3, name every other important show, China Joy, and us as 11-bit, we are on those shows as well. Global reach. To build, you need to know that, for example, China, it's a special market. It's becoming slowly, it's becoming #1 world. I'm talking too long, right? Damn. Okay. Global reach. This is what publisher can do. We can spend money for campaigns. We have manpower to build organic growth. We produce trailers and stuff like that. We have PR contacts, hardware support, so we can get dev kits. We can get super sweet, powerful NVIDIA cards if you need those and stuff like that. We know the distribution channels. We know the guys from Humble Store, PlayStation Store, and so on. We know how to handle multiple revenue streams, which is super important for indies, because $10 may be not enough, but $10 here, 10 here, 20 here, it can build a proper revenue for you. Plus, we have our own QA division, and I think publishers should have one. Last important thing, read your deal with a publisher a million times, and I shouldn't say that, but it's really, really important. Don't give away your IP. It's been said a million times today, so I'm gonna say it for the millionth time again. And we as a publisher, we don't take IP because as a developer, we wouldn't do that in the past as well. It's your intellectual property, stick to it. And yeah, the crowd is speaking. And guess what? I stole this beer from the internet too. Thank you.
Hands already.
All right. Thank you for your presentation. Going back to the Golden Gate screenshot, and you mentioned that marketing starts with the game. Do you think if they made a perfect strategy and marketing campaign with the game like that and with the price like that, they have, I think, Golden Gate. Do you remember the screenshot that you showed? Because as far as I know, it's like €27, and with those screenshots, do you think they would be able to sell much more copies if they handle the strategy properly in this case?
No, maybe better, but this game has its flaws as a game. That's another problem as well. So yeah, another thing is that advertising will not cover the weak product. And maybe that's the case as well.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Anyone?
I can ask another one.
Okay.
About the Facebook ads, I'm pretty sure there's a consensus that if your game is under $15, then it's really not worth to buying Facebook coverage. What's your opinion? Is it worth it for $20 plus games, or?
I think it's worth for every game, and actually I have a proof for that. There's a Polish publisher called Playway. They have games from $5 to $10 to $20. their main strategy is based on sponsored ads on Facebook. They spend a ton of money on it, but it works because there is no golden rule, but if you have a big traffic on your game, there's some conversion always. So the bigger the traffic, the bigger the chance for bigger conversion. This is their strategy. It's working. They released 9/11 Operator, which was quite a successful game, a car mechanic simulator, which was insanely successful. So it works. However, they spend big money on that. We don't do that, but I can tell you, yeah, it brings you traffic.
Anyone else? Great.
There you go.
Yeah, you said that one important message, don't announce your game too early. For me, it's a little bit contradictory because it feels like it definitely applies for well-established companies like for Frostpunk. We don't want to announce it too early. People just all want to play it already and won't forget it. But what about indie developers? Should we also do that?
I disagree, because in the meantime we spent a ton of money on high quality trailers. The game was available on many shows and PR tours, and we managed to get a coverage many times on PC Gamer, Rock Paper Shotgun, and so on. So we filled this time. Now if you announce a game and then for a year nothing is happening, people will forget. The attention span of people is dead. You know, for example, YouTube made a research on how big is the attention span of people watching videos, and if they are not get caught in, it was back in the years, in 13 seconds, that means that they would already skip the video or not be interested. Now the attention span of YouTube dropped to 7 seconds. So imagine that people are attacked with so many information that if you don't attack with information about your game as well, it's going to be forgotten. So yeah, if you have a plan for 2 years campaign, sure, do so, but keep in mind you need to have a great story every month or every 2 months. That requires time, that requires creativity, that requires assets, money. Shorter campaign, I think, is better, but it has to be intensive.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Last question? Yeah.
I'll ask you the same question. What is the point in the press?
Yeah, that's a good point. So I have a few examples on that. We released once a game called Funky Smugglers, and the only big coverage came from IGN actually, but the story landed on the main page, and we were at 15,000 copies, I think. It was for $1 again. After IGN, we sold another 5,000 copies in a few hours on App Store. So it worked, but that's just one story. On the contrary, I completely agree with Agnieszka that one story won't give you sales, but it's a snowball effect. So you are creating awareness about your title through press, and often the readers of gaming media are your super core target. So on average, an article on Kotaku or PC Gamer is read by 100,000 people. So if the conversion is only 1%, and usually I think it's slightly bigger than that, you have 1,000 copies sold, but that would be not just this single article, but the snowball. So few articles on Rock Paper Shotgun, few articles on Eurogamer. There's a ton of media that should be your number one, I think. Plus there is probably some media, which I don't know, dedicated to games like you do, for example, Politer. But that would be Kotaku, Games.IGN, Rock Paper Shotgun, Eurogamer, Destructoid. This is probably the most important set, I think.
Okay, thank you very much.
Right.